What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my highlights for Steam Next Fest here in June of 2023. As every quarter or so, Steam likes to put on a festival about upcoming games, typically smaller indie titles, and give them a little bit of a spotlight, including thousands of free demos to help out some of these smaller titles that might not usually get a lot of marketing, so to speak, otherwise. So with that exact thing in mind, when this happens, I like to cover some of my favorites from each individual Next Fest, but as I did mention, there are thousands of games that participate in this every single time, and I could not possibly cover them all. So while these are my favorites that I played, I would encourage you to check out the festival yourself and maybe see if there are some demos going on. That said, the festival kicked off on the 19th a couple days ago and is running through the 26th, so from the time of this video, you'll still have a few days to go look at all of this for yourself. But with no further ado, let's jump into it and get to talking about some of these. First up, we have Shadow Gambit, the Cursed Crew, a game that I covered in its own video a little while back, but this is a stealth strategy game that sees us taking on a cursed crew of pirates, each with their own unique abilities as we fight off an Inquisition, who are actually the bad guys, who are trying to get their hands on our pirate treasure. But this is a fun game, and as somebody like myself who really enjoys tactical gameplay, this stealth strategy title has that in spades, albeit with a stealthy approach. But a lot of it involves meticulous planning and setting up attacks against enemies, in some cases using multiple characters all at the same time. And what I've played of this has left me so impressed that it's one of the titles I'm looking forward to the most, and this one's actually coming out this August, so we don't have much longer to wait for this one. Second up though, we have Cyber Knights Flashpoint, a TRPG set in a future cyberpunk era, where we manage a group of criminals, essentially, who are planning heists in typical cyberpunk style. But what's really interesting about this is the narrative and how it gets weaved. At the start of this, you'll pick an origin of sorts, how your criminal organization came to be, and this, alongside choices you'll make between characters and their relationships with each other, will then generate the story, which gives it a certain dynamic element. And if they can pull that off, that on top of the very solid TRPG mechanics, I think will make for a really interesting title that I'm looking forward to. This one is slated for an early access release in Q3, so again, few months from now roughly, before we see even more of that one. Number 3, however, we have something a little bit different with Hammerwatch 2. Now, I admit I have never played the first Hammerwatch, but the presentation of this demo had me interested, and while it is a pixelated title, there's a lot more to it than you might think at first glance, as this game will support co-op and you'll be able to play this with friends as you take on various quests in a bid to help out the villagers and the like you'll meet along the way. But what I really enjoyed about this is that alongside the more traditional RPG elements you'd expect from a game that looks like this, we have this real-time combat system that has all sorts of skills and upgrades, there's classes to choose from, and altogether it kind of makes playing the game feel a little bit like an ARPG, with some of the stuff you'll encounter later in the title actually having like full-blown mechanical boss fights you have to work around. So it's a game that I think blends a little bit of the old with the new, which really stood out to me personally, and this one is also due out in August, and I think it has a lot of potential. Number 4, however, sees us with a slightly different take as we play a wizard with a gun, which is both the premise and the title. In Wizard with a Gun, wizards have turned to using their magic through the power of guns. Instead of shooting bullets, we shoot spells out of them, which is a novel enough concept, but when combined with the ability to both design the weapons the spells will be using in said weapons, and even with a bit of base building as we seek to unravel exactly what happened in this world that has been ripped apart by chaotic energies that force us to resort to turning back the wheel of time itself. Now, in terms of gameplay elements, this essentially is also an action RPG. But with the base building, crafting, and again, just the novelty of it, I think this game has a lot of potential to be something really cool. And it is also due out later this year, though no firm release date in mind. And then we have a third-person action-adventure called Garde, a somewhat comedic game all about taking part in various duels while fighting against tyranny with a good bit of style at the same time. Now, gameplay-wise, the focus here is all on the combat, and in that regard, it is very good. Much of the combat sees us juggling multiple enemies at once, which requires us to dodge, parry, and fight back against the guards of this tyrannical government. Then we introduce elements like the ability to utilize the environment in a lot of fun and varied ways that can lead to a lot of sort of fast-paced but somewhat silly at times action that feels really good to play. And when you start battling multiple enemies, that is to say like 5 or 6 at once, there's a surprisingly high skill curve to it that can make nailing it feel very rewarding. And that's what I think this game has going for it as a strong suit, which is why it made this list despite probably not being something I would have played normally. That said, there is one last game I want to leave you guys with. However, I saved this one for last because its demo is not technically part of Steam Next Fest. This demo will be available afterwards, and this is for Broken Roads, an upcoming post-apocalyptic CRPG set in Australia. This game, however, has a very heavy focus on the narrative on top of a rather compelling, I would say, morality system that seeks to be much more interesting than the simple black and white systems we've seen previously. And while the rest of its CRPG mechanics, I would say, are more or less what you'd expect from an indie version of that style of game, it's still very cool. When I played through the demo, I was very impressed with it, and I wanted to mention it again here. But all of that said, those are the titles I personally enjoyed the most playing through as part of Steam's Next Fest. But if there's any that you really enjoyed playing, I'd love to hear about them. Like I said, it's impossible for me to check out all of these, as there are simply too many. And in a perfect world, I'll have put some games on your radar, and you can potentially put some on mine in return. That is everything I've got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, thank you. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.